Yeah, I'm down in Tribeca, right next to De Niro, in volume number 3 of my team's breakdown. We are focusing on the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets. Hot take alert. Hot take about to happen. Hot take about to drop in 3, 2, 1. The Brooklyn Nets are good at basketball. That's not to say, any other team is bad at basketball. All of them are pretty good at basketball. But in terms of overall talent, I'd say the Brooklyn Nets are about up there. And they have a lot of questions going into this season. I mean, the only team that doesn't really have questions going into the season is the Bucks. But I would say that Brooklyn also just has to answer a few questions. Whereas the other teams, you just ask them questions. That may be a bad take. But the Brooklyn Nets, Coach Steve... If you followed basketball since the inception of it, you will have heard of Steve Nash, because he played an important part of small white boys wanting to pass the ball a little bit better. 2-time MVP, a very good passer, court vision, system player, genius at making his other teammates better, making Amari Stoudemire look like an absolute gem. Even though Amari Stoudemire was good, don't get me wrong, but maybe he wasn't as good as we thought he was. Like, once he went to the Knicks, you were kind of like, whatever. But regardless, Steve Nash is their coach, and Steve Nash is a handsome soccer fan who we thought was going to be in retirement for the rest of his life. Maybe he'd come in as an analyst, maybe he'd buy a soccer team, maybe he'd play soccer, but we never really thought that he'd be in a role such as this. He's been the head coach for now a year. Mike D'Antoni is done serving under him. He will be flying solo this year completely. So we're going to see how that mentorship really played out last year, because they made a good playoff run with the limited capabilities that they have, and they played it like a chess game. James Harden coming back off of an extremely bad injury. I wish I could show this. I'm gonna take my phone out. The fine nature of look at the Giannis Antetokounmpo has entered this video. Damn, I hope this thing doesn't die right now. Bro, what the hell is this thing doing? This thing just going for a dip right now? Alright, so that being said, Steve Nash has done a good job coaching this team, keeping all the sort of head cases in check. When it comes to James Harden, Kyrie, and KD playing basketball, they're easily some of the best basketball players in the world. Steve Nash doesn't have to really worry about them on the court. It's that off-court stuff that probably matters a little bit more. But then again, so long as they're playing, I think that their games speak for themselves. The worst thing about Kyrie Irving is that he's not playing basketball all the time, so people hear his bad takes and they just assume that that's his whole person, where he's this more complex individual. And they're not necessarily even bad takes at the end of the day. They're just his opinions, and everybody has the right to a pure opinion, such as Kyrie, especially Kyrie in my opinion. I mean, the flat earth stuff we can talk about later, but his race stuff has been really interesting and a good conversation that is bringing it to the absolute main stage. I'm not going to say that he's like Colin Kaepernick level individual, but hey, you're bringing conversation about Native Americans, about black rights to people's newspapers right in front of them, and you're making them angry. That's a good thing. Look, that can ruffle some feathers, but I digress, because we're talking about Steve Nash, and Steve Nash is the coach of the team. I would say that he had a great showing last year in terms of figuring out how to run the offense. They did a great job at developing their bigs into these fast moving, it's funny how Blake Griffin got released and obviously signed with them. I mean, who else are you going to sign with? But they kind of signed him and then formulated him into this push-pace type 4-1 role, kind of like an athletic Draymond Green. And obviously Blake has a little bit better of a shot. Blake can do a little bit more on offense, but he has such a keen basketball IQ, and it's very interesting to see Steve Nash hold his influence over a player like that. I guess the big question for Steve Nash for this year is he going to manage his loads? is he going to load manage his players a lot more? Because clearly last year, the medical staff or whoever was under the Brooklyn Nets was not doing a good job at keeping the players in check, making sure that they're not playing. I mean, look, Kyrie's was a little bit more of a fluke. Kyrie's was more of a, wow, this happened. But James Harden's second injury could have been preventable had he not come back earlier. Maybe he set him back a little bit. Shouts out to Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni in the playoffs, putting James Harden back in that game and then using him sort of like a dummy. James Harden's always going to be James Harden. People will always assume he's James Harden, but to allow KD to score more, they put him on the court just to do absolutely nothing. And that's really interesting. I have never seen anything like that in basketball history. Some weird animals back there. The offense is very reminiscent of Mike D'Antoni's system. It's a very fast-paced movement type system. I think that players like Patty Mills and LaMarcus Aldridge and Bruce Brown and all of those types of players thrive. And it's just a matter of keeping those people in check. I mean, if you have Kyrie Irving, KD, and James Harden on the court, you're not going to lose a lot of basketball games. They're going to make the playoffs this year. They're going to try and make a big playoff push. They're going to threaten every single team that they play against every single night, so long as they're all there. I mean, it's the same thing with a lot of teams right now where it's just like, will your medical staff be able to save you from this disgusting horribleness that is injuries? And it's my broken record of every single sort of video that I do is that if a team is uninjured, they're going to do good. Now, I think that the Brooklyn Nets probably have the highest ceiling in all of the teams. If they're healthiest, that's not a crazy take because Steve Nash knows how to use these players at the right moments, especially a supporting cast. Like when they were going to sign LaMarcus Aldridge, I was kind of freaking out because people talk about how he's a scrub. I remember Blake Griffin had that quote where they were like, we're scrubs until we make it onto the Brooklyn Nets. Then everybody's angry about how good we are. But I remember when they were going to sign LaMarcus Aldridge and thinking to myself, God damn, that's going to be the craziest space team in existence. Because LaMarcus Aldridge just lights out from 3 feet under the basket and then mid-range. He's lights out from mid-range completely. He's not going to miss a shot from out there. It's warm-up jumpers. It has been his whole career. Think about those dribble kickouts from Kyrie, KD, and James. I mean, it's crazy. So now, with all of these tools that they have, even if you insert Patty and LaMarcus Aldridge into the lineup, that spaces their team an insane amount and maybe puts Kyrie more of a 2 position, which we would all love to see as NBA fans because obviously his whole career he hasn't loved being in that PG role the whole time. He's not like Steve Nash. That brings me to my players to watch. Now, in my players to watch segment, I usually do 3 people, and there are 3 very obvious individuals, but I'm going to try and just get the obvious individual out of the way because it's somebody I feel passionately about, which is Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is an amazing player. I think he's a little bit overrated, but there's no question as to his playing ability. There's no question that he can lead and help a team win a championship, which is something that people don't really take into account that much. Obviously, you know, he has the special shot against the Warriors that helped seal the deal. People tend to still underrate him, in a sense. People just forget that when he's on the court, he's this awesome player. I will say that Kyrie definitely needs to work on being a better teammate. Now, that's not to say last season he wasn't a better teammate. He was a better teammate when he did play last season. But I think in the future, you're going to have to communicate with a sort of squad. I hope you see the difficulty of me explaining this because when Kyrie is selfish, you want him to be more unselfish. And when he's unselfish, you want him to be more selfish. So he's always been this weird sort of in-between guy. But this season, he probably has to just go into it with a mindset that he's going to just play his butt off. And I hope, going back to Steve Nash, that Steve Nash finds a lineup that is perfect for him, that spaces the floor for him perfectly, that he can work on players and passing. And I don't think a coach, now he had the Celtics years and he tried carrying the team himself, but I don't think a coach or a team has really tried to figure out what lineups would help Kyrie the most. I think if you put 4 other players on the court, Kyrie is going to do his thing anyway. But how do we put 4 other players on the court that will improve Kyrie? Which is not that hard with James Harden and KD, but he's going to pass first in that aspect. Sometimes you really don't want him to pass first. As a coach, you want him to get going, you want him to push the basket, you want him to go crazy. You want him to be Kyrie Irving. The player to watch this year is Kyrie Irving because of the fact that they need to figure out a more effective way to use him in this offense. My second player to watch, and this is a selfish player to watch because I actually have been a big fan of him for years, is Paul Millsap. Now, this was kind of an underrated signing from them where it could prove to be a really effective deep playoff run player, where a player like Paul Millsap is usually perfect on the court. He doesn't really raise any eyebrows in terms of how he's playing and what he's going to do on the court. And I think that Steve Nash is going to use him in a very unique type role. Because he's older and he's slower, he's in a little bit more of a forward type role where he won't have as much movement. But I think that can prove really helpful for a team like this, where him and LaMarcus can play similar roles, putting your back to the basket and then just figuring out the best pass to make. And I don't even know what position he's going to play. I think they're going to end up playing him the 4. I don't know who they're going to play at the 5, but all I know is that this is the strongest bench that they've ever had. They've literally, I know that the Lakers are old, and this team is also old, but they've put together such a talented group of individuals that is like unselfishly talented. Whereas the Lakers kind of have a group that's a little bit more selfishly talented. This is a group of unselfish, talented individuals that will help a roster. And Paul Millsap has always had a special place in my heart as a player that always consistently makes the right play. I mean, this is a player that's proven that you can figure out a system, you can improve that system. He's done it for every single team, no matter what his age is. So a player to watch is Paul Millsap, man. I got his jersey, the Atlanta Hawk jersey, man. He's a great player. And my last player to watch is probably Joe Harris, because everybody knows that dog crap run that he had last season, that playoff series against the Bucks, where he just went absolutely mind-numbingly cold, was kind of ridiculous and very out of character. And he had this quote the other day where he was like, "My mom and sister really butted into me about this." Well, guess what, Joe Harris? You didn't do your job right. And that's not a criticism on him too much. I wouldn't do the job right too if I was in that situation because, pressure. But he better come back this year with a rejuvenated three-point shot that isn't going to mess up, that he's going to keep consistent, because it's all about mechanics at the end of the day. He messed up his mechanics somehow in that series, whether that be his head or whether that be some sort of different thing that was going on. It's really hard to say what happened with that. But he does have a few questions that he has to answer. So he's a player to watch, certified, because if he's playing good, where Kyrie can coast his way to the playoffs, I mean, look, coasting is like 15 points per game and hitting big shots. Paul Millsap, he's not going to really make or break your championship run. He's going to contribute as much stuff as he can. But Joe Harris seems to be the one player that can mess up their run somehow. So that brings me to transition into the whatever this is. This is the, what is it? Predictions segment? Yeah, this is the prediction segment. I predict that the Brooklyn Nets will be very good at basketball. And I predict that this season they will get 55 wins. 1 seed in the East. Have to be. With no Ben Simmons, the 76ers are going to not be the 1 seed. That's a regular season player right there. Have to be the 1 seed. And championship? We're a little bit early, but they're the 1.